Hi friends, I'm Amelia.
I'm Danielle.
And welcome to Sybil's Lab of Cartomantics on YouTube. We are so happy to have you back for part 3 of our 3-part Tarot School series. So welcome to Tarot 301, your advanced course in Tarot. Danielle, would you like to tell us what we're going to be going over today?
Yes, this is really simple, but I will say really quickly, in a lot of ways, this is the video that both of us were looking for years into our tarot tube journey. So it's really exciting to think about answering the question for where to go once you feel confident with the basics and the intermediate stuff. So for people who've been doing tarot for a long time and are ready for a different challenge, we think that these are opportunities to stretch yourself. But for today's structure, we're going to do what we did for our other videos. We have 3 decks per person and 3 books or resources or practices, one of which is associated with each of those decks. So we're just going to take turns and surprise each other and see what it is that we recommend. So Amelia's going to get us started with her deck and her book thing, practice, task.
Our objective. I'm an objective teacher. I teach skills. So it's like, what skill are we working on? Okay, so our first skill that we're going to be working on, our first objective, is to continue to add to that symbolic language library that we are building for ourselves. Like, friends, that is a catalog that will never cease to grow, to continue growing. It will always, you will always be adding to it. After a while, it will become so second nature. You'll be reading something in a random book that has nothing to do with tarot, and you'll go, this is like the moon card, and that's going to go into your catalog of symbolic language for the moon card. But until we can get to that point, we're going to do it intentionally. So this go around, we are going to be adding the symbolic language of astrology to tarot. So last video in 201, I spoke about kind of like the 2 big branches of Golden Dawn correspondences, and I encouraged you to start with Kabbalah, of course, and then Danielle said astrology. So I'm just like flip-flopping it this time. You know, I think astrology is, because Kabbalah does too, but astrology just feels like a different thing, an animal other than tarot. So that's why I kind of save it for this advanced. Friends, I am still learning to work with astrology and tarot. I've been reading for 15 years, and I am still figuring out how astrology fits into my personal reading style with tarot. So, you know, if you're like 2 years into reading and astrology feels like this beast that you have no idea what to do with, fear not. 15 years in, you could still be where I am. So the book that I'm going to recommend for this is called The Tarot Handbook by Arrien. And the reason I recommend this is because it doesn't get too in the weeds about astrology. It's there. She talks about it. She has great references or appendices in the back where she just lists out like each astrological kind of thing, attribute. So you've got like all of your signs of the zodiac. She goes into the planets as well. Not on that page. The planets are here. The planets are here. Here are the signs. And she just gives you like a little blurb about each one. And that's it. Like that's a good place to start with astrology. You don't need to go into the nitty-gritty with astrology to start working with it. And then, of course, when she goes into her descriptions of each of the cards, she talks about the astrological associations and kind of how it plays in. Caveat about this. She is not a student of Thoth, or a student of Crowley, I guess I should say. She's a student of Thoth. She's not a student of Crowley. So if you are looking for, this is Crowley and his view on astrology, this is not that book. This is kind of its own take on what she sees in the cards and her experience of those cards. And her knowledge of kind of the Golden Dawn system that went into those cards. If you are looking for a Crowley interpretation, this is not that, you can find that elsewhere, but I really recommend this one. I think it's wonderful. It's readable. There are great exercises in the back if you want to kind of play with those. But really, if you're looking for just like, this is a first step into astrology. And I am all for like taking a first small step. You don't have to go into the deep end. I am a person, like, thanks to ADHD, that I jump into the deep end very quickly on things, but then become very quickly overwhelmed by it. And if I had started here with astrology, I think I would be much further along than I am now with it. So that's what I'll say about that. Okay, decks to work with. Of course, you can go to Thoth or even Rider-Waite-Smith. Yeah, Danielle's going to show her Thoth because I forgot to bring mine.
Trimmed. And this is per Emile's recommendation from last week, trimmed.
To trim it. Although if you have an untrimmed copy, on the trimmed, there's the glyphs that are in the images. So you can still find them. And that's like kind of a Where's Waldo experience for yourself. Just looking for the glyphs. Or I know this is a Thoth book, but totally go back to your Rider-Waite-Smith, line them up together. Say, how does the Two of Swords show up as the moon in Libra in both the Thoth and the Rider-Waite-Smith? Play some comparison games for yourself. If you're getting bored of Rider-Waite-Smith and Thoth, then I recommend moving to something like the Ashira Tarot. This is a great deck. You can find it on Sarah Wheatley's website. It links to a print-on-demand site called Drive Through Cards. She created this deck mostly with Kabbalah in mind, but the astrology is absolutely still there. She even has the glyphs that right there for you, much more clearly than Lady Frida Harris did her glyphs, so you can find them pretty easily. And line up all three. Say, how does this card from each deck show the astrological associations? And just play with that if you're able to. So Sarah Wheatley does not outright offer a guidebook with the Ashira Tarot, although one exists. So I know when we in our book club did a study of this deck, Danielle was able to contact her and get a PDF of her guidebook. And then we were able to print it out on Lulu. So feel free to contact Sarah Wheatley through her website, and we'll have that link down below to see if you can get your hands on a guidebook. She also goes into astrological associations and how she puts that into her deck. So you can kind of see the thought process behind how she works with astrology and tarot. And you're really, again, just like we do with all of the other symbolic languages that we've worked with so far, we're starting to build connections. We're starting to think about, how is this showing up in this card? And how do I feel like this adds to the meaning or adds to the experience of reading this card? You know, look for connections across cards. This is something really cool about working with astrology, is if you lay out several cards and you go, oh, I see a lot of presence of Libra here, or I see the moon several times present. Like, that is such a cool, like, you know, we talk about building connections between the cards. Astrology is a great tool to have in your tool belt for building those connections across cards. And that will help you kind of fill the gaps in between. But yeah, just working with this new language, adding it to the other languages, saying, how does this work well with suit? How does it work with number? How does it work with all of my other things that I've built up so far? And just continuing to explore and play with it. That's like my biggest recommendation with any symbolic language you're adding to tarot. It's not that serious, and just play. Like, just be curious about it. And it's okay if you study astrology and go, I want to put this down because I don't feel like it's adding anything to my personal reading practice. That's okay too. It's okay to say, this does not add. Constantly ask yourself that question. Is this adding? Is this enhancing my reading? And it's okay if it doesn't. But that's
Totally agree. I think part of our objectives aren't to suggest that you sort of engage with an idea and permanently integrate that into your reading. It's to familiarize yourself with something and then figure out whether it's worth maintaining or not. So like introducing yourself to the idea of astrology and then saying no thanks, or yes, please, mindfully, and not like sort of out of fear avoiding it. Maybe I'm projecting there.
Well, a little bit of a like an analogy, and maybe I'm like speaking to the wind here because nobody will understand this, but a side practice that I have is that I play the banjo. And banjo players work with what are called tags, which is just a collection of notes that are coming usually 6 to 8 notes at a time, and we'll learn all of these different tags. And when we're sitting around at what's called a jam, which feels really improvisational, so you're sitting around with people that you've never met before, or maybe you have, but you haven't played this particular song before. Someone leads a song, and then you as a banjo player just start playing based off of the notes that the other person is playing. I never heard this song, but I can play something on the banjo that sounds good as backup to what the lead is playing. The reason is because I have this collection of tags that are filled in this little toolbox that I keep by my side, this proverbial toolbox. And at any given time, I can pull a tag out that fits with the G chord that someone on the guitar is playing. I can pull a tag out that fits with the C chord. I can see the progression of chords, and I can pull tags out as I need them. This is kind of like that. We have a toolbox of all of these symbols and these associations and these correspondences, and we can pull them out when we need them, but we don't have to need all of them all the time. Like, there's nothing worse than sitting down for a tarot reading and you get like a lesson in all of the correspondences for a single card that somebody pulls for you. That's not a good reading. That's that's just a lesson. But you can use your intuitive muscle that we're working on building too at the same time and go, oh, I'm really feeling like the presence of Libra here is significant, and talk about that. But they won't all come out at the same time.
Yes, I like that. I love a metaphor.
Nobody else around plays banjo, but it made me think of that.
I just learned something about playing banjo. I love that about you. All right, guys. My first objective is going to be, so I am a person who feels really comfortable with the theoretical architecture of things. I live in air. I sort of glom on to understanding. I don't integrate a lot of astrology into my reading, but I actually feel like sort of safe and orderly in exploring that. So that was like more of my memorizing that stuff and understanding in the most, I guess like maybe like functional and less depth terms, like, okay, which cards are assigned to which planet or whatever. So I would find it really helpful, the kind of study that you're talking about with like actually digging into the meaning of Jupiter, but I know what cards are associated with Jupiter, for whatever that's worth. But in any case, because structure really sort of feels safe to me, it's losing the trappings, the familiar trappings of tarot that can feel really unsafe and discombobulating and uncomfortable. So my first objective is going to be to work with a deck. In this case, I'm talking about the Marielle Tarot, a mass market deck that holds on to the very basics of tarot architecture. So 78 cards, 22 cards in the majors, whatever, but to the familiar archetypes of tarot that we would say like a 6 of Wands is victory or whatever. Like the creator says, no thanks. It's very much doing her own thing. So show the guidebook. I think that if you're working with this particular deck, this guidebook is as much a part of the experience of reading with the cards as the art themselves. It is, I'll sort of show the cards as I talk about them. This is the second edition of the deck. The guidebook is profoundly poetic and unfamiliar to how we traditionally see a guidebook operate. Would you mind reading like a few sentences from one of the cards just to give us a sense of like, we're not saying the 6 of Wands means this, like upright. This is what you give us a few sentences to show us what it is that we're seeing in a guidebook meaning.
Sure. So this is the entry for the 4 of Swords. She says, the more I work on and know the language of symbols found within tarot, the more I find solid definition to be limiting. And in reality, it is much more fluid and vast. So that gives you actually a good, like, that's her thesis on tarot. So is the case with the number 4, a number of earth. I always wondered why the emperor was there rather than the empress, who seemed to so much more embody the idea of Mother Nature. I committed myself at some point to using the symbols as found in tarot in the major arcana rather than trying to alter them or rectify them with any system I might know. So I did not compare and fix. I learned from what was. And what was a male emperor standing for the prime number of earth, element, and physical universe.
Okay, that gives you a sense. This feels very autobiographical. It feels very exploratory, very poetic. I think that that's a guidebook that you can dig into, whether or not you actually have the cards in front of you or even have the pictures of those cards. She's talking about things that are ephemeral, spiritual, and how would I put this? If I like order and I do, she does not. So I remember we studied this like Ashira. We, in our little group of tarot deck studiers, students, studied Marielle, and I was the person who had trouble with this deck because I was frustrated with the guidebook. I didn't feel like the guidebook was doing what I wanted it to do. I don't like a guidebook, frankly, that says upright in romantic, relationship readings, this is what this card means. So I don't like that, but I do like a deck or a guidebook rather that says, when you see the dove in this position, this is what I, as the artist, was thinking. We're not doing either one of those things in that guidebook. In the guidebook, she is musing on the meaning of art and spirit and earth and the number 4, and may mention only passingly the clouds that we see in the 4 of Swords, right? Like, it is not, I would not call that the genre of guidebook as we find it anywhere else in tarot. That is not, it's called Landscapes of the Abyss, isn't it? I mean, I wouldn't even call that the Marielle Tarot guidebook. I would call it Landscapes of the Abyss, the book that happens to come with the Marielle Tarot. So this deck, I think, if you make it to 301 and you want to force yourself out of any familiar architecture, I find this deck profoundly defamiliarizing and so beautiful. Like, even though I was frustrated by trying to learn this deck and feel comfortable with her symbolic language, which is very coherent. Like, Marie White clearly has an account of, how we see wings operate in the different pieces of art that she puts together, how colors come together. So it is a really mindful language that I was trying to run from every chance, but it's so mesmerizing. It's so beautiful. So no matter how frustrating, I got the opportunity to look at really pretty art. This is not a deck, I don't think, for big spreads. I think every card has so much to say. Of course, it can work that way, right? Any deck can work any way that you need it to. But I would say if you use a deck like this for big spreads, you're losing the 301 element of it. If 301 is like, do intensive work with this Knight of Swords, dig in. Who is that Knight of Swords? What is up with the owl's eyes? What's happening with the design, the serpent design on those swords, all of it? You don't have to pay attention to those details, but there's so much work to do in that one image that if you have 6 of those cards on the table, like, you're not going to be able to give the art what it, the attention that it invites. And that's okay. Not every reading is for that. I would say that, and the guidebook is organized this way, that her conception of tarot is much more numerological than it is anything else. All of the 6s and the minors are archangels. All of the 10s are the 4 horsemen. One of each are the 4 horsemen, like, wild stuff. Really. And given how clearly, like, This is a spiritually inflected deck, and we are embracing spiritualities, including the Judeo-Christian tradition. I mean, we're going for like the Book of Revelation, 4 horsemen with our 10, whatever. So we're reaching everything. Our Queen of Wands is, or I think our King of Wands is a Babylonian or Mesopotamian god. Like, we're everywhere and nowhere. Given that, I was surprised when we worked with it to find out how much of an earth deck it truly is. But this is a earth down, deep, dark, not dark in the way we typically, not in a deviant moon way, but like muddy, viscera, like challenging sinew kind of deck. So I would say that you have to be in the right place to work with a deck like this. You have to really, I would say that a few, maybe the 2 other decks I'm suggesting, or at least one of them, you can approach with a little bit of dispassionate curiosity. But this deck is demanding, and if you really want to study it, like, you're going there. Like, it has an intensity that, if you really want to do that work, know that that's what you're asking for and be available for that. So all of that said, any thoughts that you want to share about the Marielle? You were much more, you embraced this deck much more, and I think found it much more enjoyable than I did, as I came to each of our meetings with cold feet. So what would you say about this as a 301 deck, or what you think the objective that this fills in for 301, if you were to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so first and foremost, this is absolutely a very confronting deck. Or I guess I should say it can be. It was a confronting deck for me. The reason we as a group actually set it aside with our fellow studiers was because we were just not in the right place, like psychologically, to be working with the confronting kind of thematic nature of this deck. However, having said that, if you are in the right place and it feels good to work with it, like, this is really stretching that intuitive muscle. And remember, intuition isn't necessarily just what do you think, but like what feelings are coming up and how do those feelings bridge back to what I know about tarot, but also like what Marie White is saying in her guidebook. Like, how are my feelings how can my feelings connect and reach out to and create a web with everything that's going on here, with the imagery that's in the cards, with the write-up that's in the guidebook. Like, what can I build from all of these things? And really trusting your emotional response, your psychological response to cards as its own version of a symbolic language. I think that's what Marie was really trying to do here when she created this deck. It was a deeply personal experience, and it was built, like, her emotional experience was so important to the creation of this deck. And I think our emotional experience with the use of this deck is also just as important when we're reading with it and learning with it, especially. So this is one of those things, like, get a journal. If you don't have one already, get a journal and really, don't shy away from the response that's elicited from the cards. There are some that are like grotesque. And I think that's the point, right? Like, it's not supposed to be easy.
No, that's right. And I think in the guidebook, if I'm recalling correctly, in the introduction, when she discusses where this deck came from for her, she says something about it starting or advancing when she was postpartum, right? There's something, and, look, Amelia has given birth. I was a doula and have worked with people who've given birth. Birth is messy and very earth. It is the earth doing its thing with viscera and blood and muscle and all of that. This deck feels very connected to that embodied, creative, beautiful, profound, rough thing. So I remember reading that and thinking, like, man, this tracks.
All right. Okay, my second objective kind of builds on that. And that's to work with decks that are abstract in nature. So the deck that I'm going to recommend for this is the Margarete Petersen Tarot. This is a mass market deck put out by AGM Urania. It's still in print, although the version that is currently in print has
burgundy borders.
Burgundy border. Mine is gray because I have the older version. But this is an abstract deck. You know, there are some images that you can make out, but not entirely. And much like the Marielle, it feels like it departs so far from tarot. But it's there. It's all there. And yes, the practice that I'm going to recommend working with this deck is what I consider a type of scrying with tarot. So that's letting your eyes take in everything that you see and not feeling like you need to see and understand every little thing that you see in the images, but like what stands out and then going from there. So there are some images that are a little bit more clear than others, right? And then there are some images where there is just so much going on. And if you really zoom in on each part of the card, you'll see so many different things going on. But this is a practice in not feeling like we need to know and understand everything that's there, but being able to just pull out details and use that in a reading. Much like Marielle and Marie White, Margarete Petersen created this deck from a numerological standpoint. The little tiny guidebook that comes with this is good and really beautiful. It's poetic. There's a poem for each major arcana. The way she writes about the court cards, if at this point in your study you're still having difficulty with court cards, this deck will really help with that. She writes about them like you hear their story. They tell you the story of their creation. And like as someone, I don't know, my artistic soul loves that. Like I'm all here for that. You know, the way she talks about the minor is really beautiful too. And she doesn't give you, again, kind of much like Marielle, she doesn't really go into like, yes, and you see that there is a figure in the clouds and they're working on, like, she doesn't get into all of that. She tells you the story of the card, and then it's up to you to kind of bridge the gap between the two and between like the story that she's telling you and what you're seeing. But yes, so this is, you know, it's almost like what Danielle is suggesting with the Marielle Tarot, but like, I don't know, maybe it's a softer version. Although this lady cuts, like she's not afraid. The devil is one of the most impactful devils that I personally have seen in a card or in a tarot deck. But yes, this is about working with like abstract imagery. It's about being able to pull details. So, you know, we were talking about you have your toolbox of tarot, and you don't necessarily pull from every symbol that you see or that you know is associated with a card. This is about that, but just with imagery, with images that are so abundant. What can we pull from that and craft a reading with? Because we don't have to do everything in the card. I mean, just like if we zoom in on this a little bit, you see something that looks kind of like a snake, but we also see two people. There's clearly like some bright light going on here. There's some feathers over here in the corner. But all of that doesn't have to be a part of our reading, just some of it. Yeah.
Can you remind me of when you've pulled that out? Because I know, like, what kinds of readings do you pull that deck out for?
I have used this deck to work with grief. I've also used this deck for kind of spiritual exploration. When I am in need of like quiet and solitude, this is a deck that I frequently go to. It's a good deck to meditate with. So pulling a card and just meditating with the imagery and not needing to force understanding onto it, but just sitting with it. I've used this deck for study work, like exactly what I'm saying here and now, working with abstract imagery. What else have I used this deck for? She's like a lot more versatile than she might seem on the outside. But like grounding, it is a good deck for when you are feeling, if you're ever feeling kind of like I tend to feel a lot, it is a great deck for grounding, and for feeling, kind of finding center again.
I really like the idea of using that to work with grief. That seems like it would be such a quiet, like a place that can hold sadness and still stand. I don't know. There is something sort of gorgeous about that.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, it took Margarete Petersen something like 30 years to paint and craft every image in this deck. So it is a lifetime of work, and you can really sense the wisdom that comes through with this deck. But this is the top 10 for me. I've talked about this on this channel before, but I also just think it is a great deck for stretching, for stretching those muscles that don't get tons of work in decks that are a little bit more literal. Even something like the Rider-Waite-Smith or even Thoth, it is so clear what you're seeing, and it's so easy to go, okay, I know what that is because I see the person and they're sitting in the boat and they're going, but like when you're dealing with images that aren't as clear, you can still make a reading from that. It just takes time, and it takes presence, and it takes focus. And this is about building that skill of being present with the cards.
I like it.
All right. What's your next objective?
My next objective is embracing a deck that brings together a lot of correspondences that we are maybe uncomfortable and have to wrestle with. This will make more sense if I just name the deck. So this is the Haindl Tarot. This is another deck that we studied as a group that I wrestled with, that I complained about, and this seems to be a theme. 300 level decks are the decks that Danielle couldn't stop complaining about when we were studying them in a group. So I will share this deck as I talk a bit about it. Know that my copy is trimmed and edged. This is a mass market deck, still very much in print. But here's the thing about it. Here's a little bit about the background of this deck. So this is the creation of the German artist, Hermann Haindl, in partnership with the late, great Rachel Pollack. Haindl put together this deck. He used existing paintings, from what I understand, for the minors. So he took pieces of different existing paintings. He and Rachel, from what I understand, I just see them in his house in Germany with paintings spread out everywhere. Like this corner feels like an 8 of stones or whatever. But this isn't the sort of thing that, those artist created decks that are existing works that are sort of ham-fisted into the tarot architecture. This is certainly not that. So where we see existing paintings used, they are parsed and careful and all of that. On the minors, let me pull back out the minor. So on the minors, every single minor has a hexagram.
From the I Ching, right?
From I Ching. So each of them is assigned a hexagram. I do not know the I Ching. I just don't know it. So on top of being like, okay, this is a 5 of, what are the names of the suits in this deck?
I think it's like staves.
Yeah, I think it's staves. hold on. Let's look at the little tiny guidebook that comes with it. It is wands, cups, swords, and stones. And you'll see in the trimming that there are no titles on here. There are titles on the cards if you buy them without trimming them. The titles are very similar to what we find in the Thoth tradition, but there are some that don't overlap. So if you know the Thoth tradition titles, it gives you a place to start. I probably wouldn't have trimmed off. So this is in Thoth, the 10 of stones is the 10 of discs. In Thoth, that's Lord of Wealth. But, you know, I wouldn't push that onto this card, but it is helpful to know that like this was made somehow with like that account of the tarot in mind. Rachel Pollack is very much a student of the Golden Dawn tradition of tarot. But you had less of a hard time than I did with ignoring some of the stuff on the cards and just doing what you were suggesting with the Margarete Petersen and just sort of softly gazing at the cards and seeing how they spoke to you. I had less an easy time with that. In my mind, like, look, the hexagram is there for a reason, and it's not subtle. Like, it's there in black on this very sort of light printing. I want to know what the title of the hexagram is. That's in the little guidebook. But the text that I'm suggesting that goes with it are two separately printed great big books that are still in print that you can get online. This is the Major Arcana, and there's the separate book for the minors. It's the same size, written by Rachel Pollack. So because she was there and a part of the process of creating the deck, it's really helpful to hear from her. What am I trying to say about this deck? It gives you lots of stuff. Like if you are afraid of sitting in front of cards that have a lot of stuff on them, like I am, if that stuff is stuff that you're not like conversant with, confident with, this can be difficult. Here is one of the majors. This is the 7. That would be the Chariot. I do not know the runes. I do know the Hebrew letters. So this is Het. I do not know the name of that rune. I can look in the guidebook. I would like to be able to look at this Chariot and not only engage with the art, which is not transparent, right? Like this art, if it had nothing else on it, would be like, let me sit with that Chariot and see what there is. But on top of that, we have this stuff here. So that is like an assignment. Each of these cards feels like an assignment. Now, aside from that stuff, so majors that offer us very unspecific, exploratory Margarete Petersen energy art. On top of that, with our runes and our Hebrew letters, and on top of the Pip-ish minors with their hexagrams, we have court cards that are son, daughter, father, mother. It is meant to be in that order. And they all have like mythological titles on them. So here we have what is, I think, the Mother of Stones, either the daughter or Mother of Stones. Mother, and she is Spider-Woman. Now. And this is also, I think it's Mother of Stones in the West. Like all of the suits are assigned to one of the 4 directions. I don't know the myth of Spider-Woman. I know the name of the myth of Spider-Woman, but I don't actually know that. Like, that's a lot. And I really want to know, like, this is not you look in the guidebook and it tells you, oh, that art is supposed to be Spider-Woman. This artist was like, no, you are not going to look at this and not know it's Spider-Woman. This is Spider-Woman, which would seem to me to be an assignment that I know something about Spider-Woman. So that is not possible for most of us who, like, even if we're good at memorizing things, most of us are not going to be able to memorize all of the hexagrams and just have them at the ready. when we're reading with the minors and feel really confident with these very non-traditional pippish minors, even if the titles are still on them. So you have to, if you're working with a deck like this, develop some sort of competency and confidence in surrendering to the learning process as you work with the deck. So like as we were working with this in a group, had to accept, give myself a little talk every time I use the deck and say, okay, I'm going to do a reading, and I'm not going to let this reading of 3 cards take an hour while I read these lengthy guidebook entries. I'm just going to see what these readings do, and maybe later I'll look up one of the cards and see what one of the hexagrams means. But I'm not going to insist that in order to do a simple 3-card reading, I understand the meaning of like this hexagram and its history in the I Ching. I'm just not doing that. Being able, for a lot of us, being able to surrender to not knowing what is very insistent in its presence is a skill. And embracing the learning process and using the deck during that learning process and still calling yourself a person who feels confident reading with it, even though you haven't like sort of grasped everything, is a learned skill. I would say that this objective for 301 is an objective of like reading with something as you learn with it and feel really confused and still embracing that. For those of us who like have made it here, we probably feel getting, smarty pants about tarot and we know and whatever. Haindl is here to tell you do not know. You don't. You really think you do, but you don't, because I'm betting not all of you understand the myth of Parsival next to the hexagram this and, and that rune over there. But it's good. It's humbling. Really quickly, I have to say I did what is the place in New York that has like a week-long conference?
Reader Studio. No. Omega.
So I went to the 3-day Omega tarot event and didn't do the full week because like I don't have money like that. Did the 3-day thing, which was really fun and a great experience. And I met this tarot reader who had driven in from Canada, and we all had our working decks that were our decks for the weekend that we felt most confident with. And this was his deck. Blew my mind. So we're like sitting at meals, eating together, just doing silly play readings and talking about how we love tarot. And he's really down to earth and fun to talk to and whatever. I'm not like one of those highfalutin people. So I'm like, let's read about the grass. Let's read about the dinner or whatever. And he just had Haindl on the table doing this. It really like brought it into perspective. These are just cards. He didn't know what all the runes meant. So in any case, that's my very lengthy plug for like humble yourself, I guess. Am I projecting? I might be projecting.
No, it's a good, like, when you get to this stage in learning tarot, it's good to remember that you're not going to know everything, like all of the academic side of tarot, and that's okay. Like, that really is okay. I mean, gosh, Danielle and I haven't even mentioned tarot history at this point, because that's a whole rabbit hole that you can fall down, and that can enhance your readings. But it's also important to remember to not let the things that you don't know hold you back from executing a reading, from just reading the cards. Just read the cards. And read the cards with what you have, and the rest is going to come as you continue to work with them. But like, when you look at that card, what is it that you do know? What is it that you do see?
We are going to move to your objective. I have to say, this is a fun, perfect example of like how Amelia worked with this versus how I worked with this in our group. There was a 4 of Swords that came up in a reading as we were like all in a group. So we did a spread as a group and we're trying to interpret it. And I remember being like, I have to know what this hexagram means. Like, I can't do this reading without understanding this hexagram. It feels very important. And you were like, but the leaf is floating. And I was like, I won't do this. I don't do this without knowing the hexagram. And you said like the leaf says everything. The leaf says nothing. That is like, you know, as hard of a time as I give her, that's exactly what I needed to do. And like later I can look up the hexagram if I want to. But like we read tarot. Reading tarot doesn't mean we have to know like the Golden Dawn meaning of purple. Most of us are pretty good at leaving that aside if we want to. But like let go of the hexagram. You can check it out later.
I remember walking you through how I read with those cards, and you were like,
no. I think you got me. I was good with the hexagrams, but I was like, I have to know the myths. Like their names. It's like if the card says Lisa. Like I have to know who Lisa is.
Who is Lisa? All right.
All right. What's our third objective from Amelia?
My final objective for the entire series and of this video is to put the decks aside. And
some people who hate you. You're like, my objective is no objective.
Put the decks aside and seek out tarot in life.
I like that.
If our thesis is that tarot is a reflection of our lives and tarot can guide us through our lives, then it follows that it is absolutely possible to find tarot in our lives, just out in the world, going about our regular ho-hum days. So put the decks aside, forget about them for a second. And my recommendation is to seek out tarot everywhere else that you go live your life. A book that I'm going to recommend for this, not even the whole book. And frankly, if you don't get this book, like that's fine. But this is an exercise that I didn't necessarily, I have to just like be transparent. I did not come up with this entirely on my own. I take and butcher and make it my own. But this is a book called Sidewalk Oracles by Robert Moss. This is also just a great book to read as a like diviner, as someone who uses divination. I don't know how to explain it, but anyway, the exercise that I'm going to specifically recommend if you do decide that you want to get this book and give it a read is called Play Sidewalk Tarot. And it talks about either using tarot as like a prompt that you then go answer by going out and into your world. So tarot asks the questions at your reading table, and then you go on a walk and you find the answer in the birds that are singing in the trees. Or you go on a walk and your question is formed from the things that you experience on your walk, and then you go back and you sit down with your cards. I'm going to propose that cards don't ever come into play at all, but go on a walk. Go on a walk in your neighborhood, wherever you are able to, if you are able to, and look for tarot, or even just challenge yourself. Today is Thursday, and I am going to see how much tarot I can find in my day. And okay, what do I mean by this? Because she's like, look for tarot. What does that even mean? Well, there are several ways you can do this. You can look for the visual imagery of tarot. So one of my favorite things to do is to think of like a Tarot de Marseille deck, which I know I've talked about. It was in my first Tarot 101 video. One of my objectives was to work with the Tarot de Marseille. Hopefully you haven't put it down entirely if you've made it this far through our courses here. But that's a great one to look for the imagery because it's simple. You've got circles, you've got straight lines, you've got curved lines, you've got, flowers. Look for that stuff. Where do you see a grouping of 3 circles? At the dinner table, when you're having dinner with 3 friends. Oh my gosh, we're having a 3 of discs moment here between the 3 of us. Where do you see 2 curved lines together? Oh my gosh, in the bananas that I had for breakfast this morning. Like that's what I mean when look for tarot. This is a playful act. This isn't deep, but it like has the potential to really impact your reading in deep ways. And so aside from just looking for the elements of tarot, the actual like building blocks, the stuff of tarot, also think about like, okay, at this point, you have studied enough symbolic language. You've worked with enough variety of decks. Even if you just work with like the ones that we've recommended, think about like the Four of Swords as you have distilled it thus far. Where can you find that out in your life? Where can you find a Four of Swords moment? Is it as you are waiting for the elevator and you don't have your phone in your hand and nobody's bothering you or calling you or trying to talk to you? Does that feel like a Four of Swords moment? Where do you see that in other people? Is that person more of a Queen of Coins, or is she more of a Page of Cups? Like, these are the questions to ask yourself and to look for as you move just throughout your regular life. It doesn't have to be a special thing, although it can be, like I said, go on a walk, look for tarot as you go on your walk. But it doesn't have to be that. It can be just as you move throughout your life. And the idea is that we're kind of assimilating the language of tarot and how we interact with the world, so then we can bring the world into our tarot readings. Like, we're kind of knocking down and blurring the line between the readings that we have on the table and the life that we experience out in the world, so that they can really talk to and connect with each other. Yeah, and then journal about it. Journal about it, write about it, however you take record of your life. Write about it, put it down somewhere, type it up, say it into a voice recording app, whatever you need to do. Even if you never go back and read that ever again, it helps kind of your brain and body process your experience. Yeah, that's my final objective. Put the decks aside and go look for tarot out in the world.
Do you remember what the Enrique Enriquez documentary is called?
Tarology.
Yes. In that documentary, very much reminds me of what you're recommending. But there is a moment when he's engaging with people, teaching them about tarot, and he tells everyone to sit like the emperor. Like, so look at the cards and do what they're doing in the cards. And in some way, what you're talking about sort of reminds me of that. Like, what if you were like, be the Two of Wands? Or like, you know, sit like the high priestess, whatever. Even if you're not finding it out there, finding it in your body. The idea of that is really kind of wild and interesting. But I've always been like, I want to sit like the emperor. Have you ever sat like the emperor?
Heck yeah. Yeah, I mean, but this is about, like, I don't know, finding the real world in the cards. Because if they only ever stay in our books and our decks, then they'll never mean anything real to us.
I like that. I like that. Moving in a tarot world. All right, guys, for our very final recommendation, objective, the whole spiel. This feels like kind of anticlimactic. I feel like I should have chosen something very flashy or whatever. For this one, I'm going to choose, or I will say the objective is something completely different from the Golden Dawn tradition. As I was thinking about this, I'm pretty sure that everything I've recommended in some way has a nexus to Golden Dawn, right? Like, the very loose framework of Decans. Even Marie White, who we don't find sort of deep connections to traditional notions of like what the minors look like or whatever. If she were to state that there were any correspondences, I think she would say that they're linked to Golden Dawn correspondences, maybe. If not, they're not really clearly linked to any correspondences. But there are traditions that are very correspondence, astrology, Hebrew letter anchored with completely different associations. And it's very defamiliarizing for a lot of us, right? Because it takes a lot to learn any of this anyway. So you were saying like the Two of Swords is the moon in Libra. What does the moon mean there? You had to memorize that it was the moon in Libra. Lord of Peace or Lord of Peace Restore. I mean, it's like this whole thing. Just learning the stuff laden onto this one of 78 cards is a lot to become fluent with and conversant in. And part of that process isn't just feeling like, well, that is what the Two of Swords is. It's learning how to learn what people's associations are and then accepting or not accepting what you find there. But it's a lot when you think like, oh, there are people who have utterly different associations with the Two of Swords and just as many symbols, right? Like just like their own decans and whatever from completely different traditions. So I'm recommending Tarot of the Holy Light. And in part, I'm doing that because it is a continental, what the author Christine Payne-Towler calls a continental tradition of tarot. But it forces you to take all of those muscles you've worked learning how associations work and correspondences work and what, like, how a tarot card is something beyond simply like a scene of a dude within the four corners of a piece of paper. According, like, what can it be, right? Whether or not we carry things beyond the picture, like what might it be according to different exercises or traditions or practices, taking all of the ways that we've learned to engage with cards beyond the simple and surface and seeing if we can use those muscles for something else. So this is the back of Tarot of the Holy Light. This is a deck that is still in print and still for sale. I think you can get it from like major sellers or also Christine Payne-Towler's website. But there are two very big books. They're like short. They're sort of adorable. Like, so here's like a normal size book and here's this little guy. Look at that little guy. So here are the two books that together make up like, look. Let me make this clear. I am putting this on the list because we've called 301 like the last of 3 levels, which means we're still within like, we're still moving and learning and dancing within 301. This is still very much a deck that I'm like existing around. Not necessarily. This is on my, I need to like use these muscles to learn it list because there is a lot here. So, it gives you a lot to study. I would say that this deck, I'll show it as I talk about it, is much more, for me, an air experience engaging with it than other experiences. So I don't know about you, Marielle, I would say Marielle is like earth and water and fire and is the enemy of air. It's the enemy of like thinking your way out of it, right? So these are the associations that we happen to have from Golden Dawn with the elements, like the air being the thinking, logical, rational suit, earth being embodied and practical and like in the grid of it, cups, emotions, and fire, spirit. Marielle is here to activate all of that stuff except air. What would you say that Margarete Petersen, like where she lives?
Oh, she's water and fire. She's water and fire.
Right. Like, because I'm making the list that like I maybe was looking for, it makes sense that the other 301 decks that are like the things that have made me stretch my muscles are the antithesis of air, because that's the harder thing for me to do. But this is hard to do because it's asking me to take all of that air expertise I've gained from 101 and 201 and say goodbye to it and reactivate it with something completely different. I'll show some of the quartz and some of the minors. This is a collage deck using old engravings and recolorings, completely different astrological associations with the 4 directions, completely different. I like this Queen of Swords, completely different decking correspondences. Like,
doesn't it go into alchemy too? Is that there?
The books are very much about an alchemical metaphysical tradition. Like, I am so confused. Here's the thing. And actually, this is a perfect example of what's difficult for me about this deck and what I think makes it a perfect, like, you want to stretch your muscles and do 301 work? Here's an opportunity to do one kind of 301 work. This is exactly, if I'm going to read with this, what I would have to do with the Haindl, which is to say, I don't know why this is the first 10 degrees of the sun in Leo. I don't exactly know what's happening here. This is what? The Six of Wands. I've talked a lot about the Six of Wands. This is the Six of Wands. It has nothing to do with the Golden Dawn Six of Wands. I don't know what's happening here. If I decide to read with this deck, I'm going to have to surrender. If I decide to read with it tomorrow before I've read both books, annotated them, like done years of study, I'm just going to have to look at the pictures and say, okay, well, I have some associations with the sun. I'm going to set aside Leo for a moment because I'm not, I don't feel super confident with my zodiac knowledge. And there's some fire here. That lion's wearing a crown. I asked a question about my hobbies, like, what can I make of this? And just accept the very little that I can glean and tell myself that's enough. Like, that is part of the learning process. Being, as I said with the Haindl, being able to accept an absolute ignorance as a part of the reading process while you learn. But if you are looking for a study deck, because I know a lot of people make those 10 decks to start with videos, or like 5 intermediate decks. But when I was looking on YouTube, I couldn't find a lot of like, hey, you want to really do the hard stuff? Here are ideas. This is one idea if you want to like go down a historical alchemical rabbit hole. I still don't understand alchemy in tarot. I was just working with fairy tales and like Rumpelstiltskin and like what straw into gold and alchemy. And I was like, alchemy, I understand that kind of. I understand fairy tale alchemy. I don't understand any other of alchemy. Oh, I am a simple.
Would an alternative possibility for this type of work be Robert M. Place's work with like the alchemical tarot and Neoplatonism?
I think that is a perfect example. So if you have worked with or seen the alchemical tarot, the majors are great at making you stretch those muscles, and the minors feel much less distressing than these minors do. They're scenic and intuitive, I think. For example, the Four of Cups doesn't look like a Rider-Waite-Smith Four of Cups. It's an elephant standing on 4 cups. But what is that signal? Like stability, a lack of agility, kind of hitting a plateau. Like I can work with that. I know what an elephant is. I know what the cups are. I can tell there's not a lot of movement in the scene. Like, I don't know what's happening here. What? Who's wrestling what? Like all these colors. This is a crowded image. It's cool, but Robert M. Place, I feel like the alchemical tarot is a phenomenal book. So it gives you the gift of something to study in that encyclopedia of a tome, which is also good for just the history of tarot beyond the alchemical tarot, but confines the difficult learning to the majors, which is a great place to start. But I would put that at 201. If you're looking for an air 201 deck, I think like 201 is like, okay, I can go on that journey with you, Robert M. Place. No, Christine Payne-Towler, is it weird to feel like the creator of a deck is like, I'm going to make your life difficult? I feel like this brilliant woman, she is a brilliant historian of tarot, an incredible kind of student of continental tarot, but I feel like she makes me work for it to a degree that I have not yet. Like, I do not have the degree in tarot that would allow me. Maybe, do I have a master's degree? I have one version of a PhD in tarot, and like I didn't take any of these classes. I need to go back to school.
This is not the one you took. One thing I find interesting of what you're saying with all of the decks that you've recommended working with at this level is you're not saying map on what you know onto these cards that are doing something entirely different from that. So if like to this point you feel really confident with Golden Dawn, with Rider-Waite-Smith, you are not saying map that onto these decks.
That is not 301. Nope. Yeah. 201 is becoming confident in the stuff you're talking about. 301 is nope. You got to try something different because that's hard.
It is hard. It is hard. And, you know, I think you and I are both kind of coming at that kind of overall objective, just in different ways. Like you're taking the air approach, study, learn. I'm taking like the watery, fiery approach, which just speaks to our personalities, really. But I think at the heart of it, it's all about, you know, for me at least, it's about presence. It's about being present with the card that is in front of you and not wanting to revert back to what's comfortable, because that's too easy, right? We can't let ourselves do that. But it's about building that relationship with the card in the present moment that you are seeing right in front of you and reading that card. Not reading another card through that card, but reading.
Yeah. I would say my final note for 301 for people who are like, I'm ready to do my version, you know, you person who are listening, your version of advanced tarot. The 301 creed is you have to be confident in starting over, because we're also, you know, we're both suggesting different ways of starting at step one in different lanes. And like, that's a skill, being really uncomfortable with not knowing and trusting your ability to like do some reading as you learn. And not being like ashamed of that, because I think you know, you do find some people who are like, I'm doing Thoth and I need to learn like all of the decans and whatever before I'm like their pictures on a card. Give it a shot. You know, like absolutely. There's a lot here. Don't get me wrong. Like if you've never touched a Thoth deck, it's just as mystifying as I'm finding Haindl with all of its hexagrams and whatever. By all means, it can be overwhelming. But in the meantime, I think it's easier to like be like, that's an intense purple and an eagle than a leaf. You and that damn four swords, but there's a leaf. I will forever remember that. That is like a little epigraph for a book about tarot.
Here's the thing. The open reading method, which is like where I recommend starting, will get you so far. It will get you so far with tarot. That's not to say don't study, don't learn, but like it's also okay to just read what you see.
Yes.
And that's also there. Okay. So let's do a reading for our friends. Danielle, so what's our question?
Our question is, since we're talking about pushing ourselves, like moving in tarot land that is unknown and difficult, is in what ways do we need to stretch our learning this week? Like, how do we need to do tarot in an uncomfortable, pushing ourselves learning kind of way this week? I grabbed the Thoth because I actually want to like do a reading for people and not staring at a card with a crucifix, snake, like confusion. But I'll do a reading later with that, I promise, guys. What deck are you using?
I pulled the Margarete Petersen.
I like her. I use the Marielle. I have used the Marielle to much avail for ancestor and past life work. It's really great for suspending that. What was it for? You said Ashira was your first deck. What kind of work do you use Ashira for?
This is like when my mind is buzzing and it's like I want to do stuff with tarot. That's what Ashira comes out.
I'm thinking I'm angry. Ashira will listen to me. She's mad too. All right, what do we need to learn, or how should we push ourselves this week? I have the Ace of Discs.
I have the Mother of Cups. Kind of like
have the nice powers of Earth. Okay, let's see.
So, okay. Something that I'm seeing here, which is kind of interesting, is that like we have this frame around our mother, this square box around her. And there's something to me that is very like stabilizing about the square as an image. And then especially when we think about the root of the powers of earth, like how grounded and stabilizing that is. And so part of me is kind of, my brain is going down this road of like really not kind of going out with our learning and going, okay, let me like touch everything and learn everything and like and bounce all off the walls with how excited I am about finding out all of this new stuff. But like, how can we really be structured and intentional and purposeful and grounded in our approach to learning this week? Maybe we give ourselves objectives. Maybe we give ourselves like one path that we're following, especially when we think about that ACE as like the number one. Give ourselves one thing to work on and really root into and ground into that. But what are you seeing?
You know, it's funny. I've heard it said that when we tarot readers imagine ourselves as one of the court cards, we all think we're the Queen of Cups or the Mother of Cups. Like she's the tarot reader of the court cards.